At the dawn of World War II, German generals sneered at their Allied foes. Patton, a reckless upstart, Montgomery, a plodding fool, the Soviets, a crumbling rabble. But by 1945, their voices trembled with dread, and what they confessed in captivity will shock you. From dismissal to dread, this is the untold story of how Hitler's commanders came to fear the men they once mocked. The Second World War wasn't just a clash of armies. It was a battle of minds, egos, and tactics, waged by some of the most enduring military leaders in history. At the beginning of the war, German generals were the most confident people. However, as the war continued, terrible losses started to alter their views. So join us as we unravel this journey of German generals. But first, welcome to Through the Ages, where we uncover history's darkest secrets. Before we unravel these shocking shifts, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Join the millions uncovering the untold truths they don't want you to know. We expose the hidden horrors that shaped our world. During the late 1930s, the Nazi military was a scary representation of precision and power. German generals, who were considered military geniuses, were confident in their ability to outsmart and defeat any opponent. Their victories were quick and significant. Poland collapsed in less than 5 weeks in 1939, while France, in spite of being one of Europe's biggest powers, fell in just 6 days, 6 weeks in 1940. So to the men in charge of the Wehrmacht's campaigns, the Allies appeared to be amateurs with commanders who lacked the skill to put up any serious opposition. Figures like Friedrich von Manstein, Erwin Rommel, and Heinz Guderian exemplified the brutal effectiveness of Germany's high command. But as the war went on and the tides changed, these same generals started to reconsider their previous judgments. Their early arrogance vanished, to be replaced by reluctant admiration, and then by a deep understanding of the Allies' power and intelligence. As the Wehrmacht rolled across Europe in 1939 and 1940, German generals reveled in their dominance. The German army's senior command levels conspired in vast program of criminality in large part because they believed the war's harsh military and economic exigencies demanded it. Heinz Guderian, who is sometimes referred to as the originator of the Blitzkrieg, wrote in his biography Panzer Leader about the Wehrmacht's supremacy with unshakable confidence. Reflecting on the early days of Operation Barbarossa, the 1941 invasion of the Soviet Union, he wrote, "The Soviet command is chaotic. They lack both discipline and direction. We expected their collapse by the first winter." Those around him generally agreed with him, considering the Soviet military to be a basic, inexperienced force that was unable to offer significant opposition. Erwin Rommel, the renowned Desert Fox, also criticized the British and their cautious strategy. According to reports, Rommel made fun of British commander Bernard Montgomery's painstaking preparation during his swift march through France in 1940. Rommel believed that decisiveness and quickness were the real indicators of a general's ability, and the British leadership seemed dreadfully insufficient in this. But that's not it. The German high command did not think much better of American generals as well. The American army looked like all the other armies who fought the Germans for the first time, one of the generals said. The Germans were well trained and highly experienced, and they caught a green US II Corps. Also, it was a hubris that affected whole nations, not just generals. Nazi ideology portrayed the Soviets as Untermenschen and subhuman, which fueled overconfidence and impacted military tactics. During World War II, the Nazi leadership utilized this racist and dehumanizing discourse to defend the ruthless treatment and mass murder of Soviet civilians, POWs, and other alleged enemies. Moreover, the early triumphs of Operation Barbarossa only reinforced this belief. By December 1941, German forces had advanced hundreds of miles into Soviet territory, and Moscow seemed within reach. The supremacy of the Wehrmacht seemed indisputable, at least to the generals. But beneath the veneer of arrogance, cracks were beginning to form. Eventually, in the harsh winters of 1942, when the Wehrmacht was trapped in the ashes of Stalingrad, the delusion of German supremacy started to fade. What was supposed to be a swift, decisive effort to end the conflict with the Soviet Union became a grueling war of attrition. The turning point came in November 1942, when Soviet forces under the command of Marshal Georgy Zhukov launched Operation Uranus. The action took General Friedrich Paulus's German Sixth Army by surprise and effectively surrounded them, cutting off their supply lines and ultimately resulting in their loss. This was a major breaking moment in the Eastern Front conflict and the Battle of Stalingrad. Later, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, who tried to assist the struggling forces in Stalingrad, wrote a memoir titled Lost Victories that included his thoughts. "The Russians learned faster than we expected," he admitted, acknowledging the rapid evolution of Soviet tactics and leadership. Hence, the Germans, who had previously written off Soviet generals as incompetent and ignorant, were shocked by Zhukov's ability to organize such a complicated operation. Likewise, in North Africa, Rommel faced his own moment of reckoning. The Second Battle of El Alamein, fought from October 23 to November 11, 1942, marked a pivotal moment in North Africa. Under the direction of General Bernard Montgomery, British forces launched a huge attack on Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps. Eventually, in the last few days of the battle, the U.S. forces rallied. By the end, their line had stiffened, and they were blasting the Germans with concentrated artillery fire, Citino explains. That halted the German offensive, and Rommel, faced with overextended supply lines and Allied reinforcements rushing into the fray, ordered his forces to return to their starting positions. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, the Afrika Korps fought boldly, but in the end, they were unable to resist the British attack. The battle marked a crushing defeat for the Afrika Korps, and Rommel's forces had to flee. Rommel even reluctantly admitted to capture British officers that they fought quite bravely. Clearly, the loss made Rommel rethink his former disregard for his enemies. In the meantime, American soldiers were starting to establish themselves on the Western Front. Patton's breakout from the Normandy beaches in 1944 shocked German commanders who had misjudged the Americans' capacity to respond. Senior generals like Fritz Bayerlein commanded the Germans, but the pace and intensity of the American attack took them by surprise. It was later acknowledged by Bayerlein that Patton's pace was relentless and like trying to fight a ghost. The success of the breakout marked an important turn in the war, as the Allies were ultimately able to begin a swift advance across Europe. Additionally, the mid-war period saw a significant change in how German generals saw their Allied counterparts. What had once been disregard turned into a skeptical respect, born of hard-earned experience on the battlefield. By the final years of the war, the once dominant Wehrmacht was in retreat on all fronts. The Allies, whom the German generals had so boldly brushed aside, were now advancing from the south, east, and west. The constant pressure made even the most arrogant commanders face the truth of their situation and reconsider their opponents. During an interview following his captivity after the Battle of the Bulge, Fritz Bayerlein provided an honest evaluation of Patton. He was reckless, yes, but effective. Without the sheer industrial might of the Americans, we might have held him back. But even then, it would have been difficult. He had an instinct for exploiting weakness, and we could never predict his next move. In his post-war comments, von Rundstedt, one of Germany's highest-ranking commanders, wrote about Montgomery with a mixture of resentment and reluctant respect. "Montgomery planned too much and moved too little," he remarked, echoing his earlier criticisms. However, he acknowledged that the British general's systematic approach had advantages, especially when a prolonged struggle was involved. So perhaps the most striking transformation in German attitudes came through their views of the Soviets. By 1944, Marshal Zhukov had become a figure of terror among German commanders. In a rare instance of vulnerability, Manstein wrote in Lost Victories, "Zhukov outmaneuvered us time and again. By the end, we were no longer fighting for victory, we were fighting for survival." This highlights the enormous challenge posed by Soviet General Georgy Zhukov, which made Manstein acknowledge that Zhukov systematically outmaneuvered German troops, changing their focus from winning to simply surviving. These post-war declarations reveal not only a change in perception, but also an intense feeling of remorse and disappointment. The arrogance that characterized the war's early years gave way to a bitter realization of the strengths of the Allies, as well as the shortcomings of the German war effort. So the journey of the German generals is a potent symbol of the dangers of underestimation. It turned out that Guderian was gravely mistaken to underestimate the Soviets as disorganized and ill-prepared. As well as Rommel's contempt for Montgomery's cautious tactics prevented him from seeing how successful British strategy was. Even Patton, whose unusual tactics initially drew mockery, emerged as a powerful rival whose unpredictability became his greatest weapon. Also, several German generals claimed in their post-war thoughts that their defeat was inevitable. They admitted that their own arrogance had a role in their defeats, even if they frequently blamed them on outside forces like the Soviet Union's enormous manpower reserves or the United States' overwhelming industrial might. In the end, they were doomed by the same arrogance that had driven the Blitzkrieg over Europe in 1939 and 1940. As Berlin fell in 1945, the surviving members of the German High Command were left to contemplate the legacy of a war that had begun with such promise and ended in total ruin. Memoirs and interrogation transcripts documenting their admissions provide a unique window into the thoughts of individuals who, for a little period of time, thought they were unbeatable. So clearly, the shift in the perceptions of German generals towards their Allied counterparts is more than a historical footnote. It is a testament to the strength of determination, cleverness, and willpower. From the snowy streets of Stalingrad to the hedgerows of Normandy, the Allies proved that underestimation is often the first step toward defeat. As we reflect on this journey, we are left with a haunting question. How different might the war have been if the German generals had viewed their opponents differently from the outset? Well, the answer, like the war itself, is a complex and disturbing reminder of the implications of arrogant behavior. Now we ask you, early arrogance, mid-war shocks, late confessions, which stunned you most? Tell us in the comments below. And to uncover more dark truths they don't want you to know, hit that subscribe button now.